and welcome to the agenda. One of the key factors of America's ascendancy to global superpower status is the availability of energy, specifically petroleum. In recent years, scholars, subject matter experts, elected officials, and national security practitioners have debated America's dependency on oil and its ramifications. This time on the agenda, we examine oil dependence and national security.
We're moving from an era of cheap, abundant energy to an era of scarce, hard to get, expensive energy.
Over the last 30 years, the United States has imported crude oil in ever-increasing numbers. According to the U.S. Energy Information Administration, in 1981, total crude oil imports for the United States stood at 2.1 billion barrels. In 2009, the number of barrels imported stood at 4.2 billion. Our nation's increasing reliance on foreign oil is beginning to reveal unpleasant implications on our foreign policy goals, our domestic tranquility, and most importantly, our national security.
It is the policy of the United States of America to continue to depend on foreign supplies of oil for upwards of 2/3 of our oil consumption to fuel energy inefficient vehicles. And if that oil gets cut off, to sacrifice the lives of our sons and daughters to get the oil. That is America's energy policy. Some of us predicted 20, 25 years ago that if we pursued that policy, we would be fighting wars in the Persian Gulf. We are now engaged in the second war in the Persian Gulf. And though our leaders won't say it, oil has something to do with it. Americans don't want to believe that, but I can tell you absolutely there is no one outside the territory of the United States who does not believe that as the leading consumer of energy and oil, the United States is in the Persian Gulf for very much else except to protect oil supplies.
Oil dependence has revealed significant concerns for U.S. foreign policy. In 2006, the Council on Foreign Relations released an independent task force report entitled National Security Consequences of U.S. Oil Dependency. In the report, the task force identified several rationales for why oil dependence is affecting U.S. foreign policy. The control over enormous oil revenues gives the exporting countries the flexibility to adopt policies that oppose U.S. interests and values. Oil dependence causes political realignments that constrain the ability of the United States to form partnerships to achieve common objectives, like China's relationship with Sudan that has contributed, in part, to the ongoing crisis in Darfur. A significant interruption in oil supply will have adverse political and economic consequences in the United States and in other importing countries. When such a disruption occurs, it upends all ongoing policy activity in a frantic effort to return to normal conditions. Inevitably, those efforts include matters of foreign policy. Some observers see a direct relationship between the dependence of the United States on oil, especially from the Persian Gulf, and the size of the U.S. defense budget. Such a relationship invites the inference that if it were not dependent on this oil, the United States and its allies would have no interest in the region, and hence, it would be possible to achieve significant reductions in the U.S. military posture.
The more resistance we're going to face and the more risk that American troops will have to be sent over there to protect the flow of oil, to protect the refineries, the pipelines, and the sea routes that carry the oil. And more of our troops are in very risky places, putting their life on the line to protect the flow of oil to fill up American cars. And inevitably there will be a loss of life, and the more dependent we become on this foreign oil, the greater the price in blood that we're going to have to pay to keep maintaining our existing oil dependency.
The United States is powered by a diverse portfolio of energy sources. In 2002, coal accounted for 23% of that portfolio, natural gas 24%, nuclear power 8%, renewables 6%. Petroleum products account for 39% of total U.S. energy consumption.
If these trucks would shut down for 1 week, this country would be in
3 days.
3 days? 3 days. This country would be, they shut the country down.
This is NBC Nightly News, Wednesday, October 17th. Reported by John Chancellor.
Good evening. The Middle East war produced developments all over the world today. The oil-producing countries of the Arab world decided to use their oil as a political weapon. They will reduce oil production by 5% a month until the Israelis withdraw from occupied territories. If the Arab countries keep that pledge, it would reduce their production by almost 50% in 1 year.
This is Action News.
Good evening, I'm Don Harrison. Gasoline prices are going up as one way of attempting to beat the fuel shortage. Federal officials have approved a 1.5-cent increase in retail gasoline prices, and the same officials warn that gas at the pump will likely go up by 10 cents a gallon by March. For tomorrow, then, expect higher prices if you can find gasoline. The predictions are that most service stations will be closed.
The nation's oil dependence leaves our economy and our very livelihoods at risk should a serious disruption to that oil supply occur.
Nothing you eat, wear, drink, drive doesn't move on a truck.
I believe most Americans understand that our dependence on petroleum is a source of vulnerability for this country. It invites attack, it invites terrorism, it's a threat to our well-being.
Most of the developed world is not only dependent, they're effectively totally dependent on oil for transportation in the way that people were dependent on salt for centuries to preserve meat. That gives power to people who control oil. It gives power to Ahmadinejad to develop his nuclear weapons program and threaten Israel. It gives power to Chavez to try to restructure the politics and economics of northern Latin America. It gives power to Sudan in keeping China with its oil deals from interfering with its genocide in Darfur, and on and on. We need to decide it is an important national objective to break oil as a strategic commodity.
Oil dependence is bringing the United States into direct competition with other emerging powers, including China and India. In addition, dependence on foreign oil leaves the nation vulnerable to collective actions initiated by OPEC, the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries. According to the Council on Foreign Relations Independent Task Force report, global dependence on oil is rapidly eroding U.S. power and influence because oil is a strategic commodity largely controlled by regressive governments and a cartel that raises prices and multiplies the rents that flow to oil producers. These rents have enriched and emboldened Iran enabled President Vladimir Putin to undermine Russia's democracy, entrenched regressive autocrats in Africa, forestalled action against genocide in Sudan, and facilitated Venezuela's campaign against free trade in the Americas. Most gravely of all, oil consumers are in effect financing both sides of the war on terrorism. There are no easy solutions to oil dependence and its impact on national security. Nevertheless, it is clear that the window of opportunity to address the issue is rapidly closing. It's clear that America's dependence on petroleum products cannot and will not last forever. Moreover, is it possible that our dependence on petroleum products may be leading us into disastrous domestic and foreign policy choices? We want to know what you think, so join the conversation by leaving a comment below. We want to hear your voice on the agenda.
More breaking news this morning, this time out of Florida, from the home of Tiger Woods.
Next time on the agenda, we examine crisis communications. How well and how poorly have celebrities handled public scrutiny in the media? Crisis communications, next time on the agenda.